Hey everybody, this is Darren Richard from Strongpoint. Thanks for making time for us in your day today. We really appreciate it. We're going to be taking you through and talking about simplifying DevOps and compliance for Salesforce. And for those of you that also have NetSuite, I want you to know that everything you see here, we also do for NetSuite. On the call with me today is also Satya Gajic. He's one of our customer success consultants, and he'll be taking you through a quick demo of the software once I take you through a couple of slides to sort of introduce what we're doing. So what we're going to be working through today is a quick introduction to DevOps and compliance and what you're supposed to be doing. Why is there often a conflict between these two things? And then we're going to talk about how we can use automation to eliminate DevOps bottlenecks. And that third part is the part that I think you're going to find the most interesting, as it highlights some of the very unconventional ways some of our customers are leveraging our software to dramatically reduce some of the bottlenecks that naturally occur in that dev process. Or maybe to flip it around another way, it allows them to be massively more responsive to their customers while also reducing risk and being compliant. Now, if you're not public or in a highly regulated industry, you can just simply think of compliance as being well managed. And the only difference between the two is that for compliance, you need to prove that you run things that way. Now, our tools give you that in spades very efficiently. So regardless of your industry or focus, they simply help any company get more things done faster and safer. So what are you supposed to be doing? That's the big question, and the answer is actually pretty stressful. If you're doing everything that you should theoretically be doing, you will kill your productivity. I think that Salesforce DevOps and admins are probably some of the busiest people in their world. And our goal is to provide the tools to let you focus your efforts on higher business value activity while being confident that the essential rote tasks are being handled automatically by Strongpoint. Look at this list: documentation, everything, all the time, and all the dependencies. That is a crazy amount of work to get done realistically. This is a massive amount of effort, and it's often left stagnant due to conflicting priorities, but it's an essential task. Risk analysis and impact analysis. One needs both informed judgment and the other expertise. Those resources are often in short supply in any organization, particularly given how mobile a lot of the Salesforce expertise is out there in the industry. So that's, we'll talk about that more later, but we can help you remove that potential bottleneck as well. Approval routing and change reconciliation. A lot of wasted time can be had in an approval process, and in truth, not every change needs an approval, but every change needs to be checked to see if it needs an approval. And that can waste a lot of time. But with automation, we can guarantee that that check happens every time without using a valuable resource. And finally, for the people that have compliance obligations or those that just want to run a tight ship, you may need to make sure that only the approved changes or the ones that didn't need approval are being made, and that they only change the right things, not only for DevOps and compliance purposes, but also for privacy and data security concerns. When people get Easter egged or where malicious code ends up in their system, it's because they didn't have proper change reconciliation. And without Strongpoint, having that is mind-numbingly difficult to achieve. So that list is an awful lot of work. And if you notice, it's not necessarily work that the company often attaches a lot of value to, even though it's necessary work. So it often gets deprioritized. And slowly the systems and the processes get worse until there's a problem that then consumes massive amounts of man-hours just simply to rectify and creates a ton of stress. So we want to show you a better way. So in the Strongpoint world, we are focused on automation to do all the heavy lifting. And in doing that, we also do things that are not only faster, but safer. So now, instead of flying by the seat of your pants without Strongpoint, which is slower actually, then if you automate it with us, you can do things the right way, all the time, and faster. And that's what's really exciting. So in a minute, I'm going to get Sasha to start the demo with you, but let me give you a quick overview of Strongpoint tools that can help you achieve the value we just talked about. Automated documentation, simple. We kill that bottleneck. We just get rid of it. Humans are terrible at documentation anyways, and our software is really good at it. Particularly documentation that we can use for other purposes. Documentation as data that we can run automated best practices against. As I mentioned before, judgment is needed for risk analysis and expertise, and so that's the key for automated documentation. As I also mentioned before, judgment is needed for risk analysis, and expertise is needed for impact analysis, and also to do cleanup and other tasks. So we take that expertise and that judgment, and we configure it in our software so we can automate those best practices. And that's the best practices that you see here. That way we can democratize those best practices and ensure, even within a space where these resources are so highly mobile, that things are being done the right way all the time. Then, in order to protect us, we have to have automated change monitoring. Dev oversight is not going to get out of the way because there are many things that people just shouldn't change. So we need to know if they're doing it or trying to do it, trying to change these things. So change monitoring all the time in a bunch of different ways to determine the risk. That's necessary. Some of these things are in system notes and audit trails, and some aren't captured, like code changes that might impact fields and that sort of thing. But Strongpoint sees it all, as well as who's doing it, who's doing what, and using what. And that's really key. And finally, the continuous compliance auditing portion. If you're going to have automated change monitoring, then you have to have a reconcilable process that says, hey, wait a second, did everything get caught? Did everything get approved if it's risky? This is important for management, obviously, but also lets us surface this to our auditors so they can go through it quickly, very quickly. What this can mean is a drastically reduced audit time. Some of our clients give access directly to their auditors for that reason. And at the end of the day, because you are continuously auditing, the outcome of the audit is generally going to be positive, and you know that in advance. And that's a huge stress reliever. So I just want you to think about a few things as Sasha goes through his audit. Things that that we've seen our clients using our software for, and things we'd be happy to talk to you even more about in more detail. First of all, knowing everything. This is going to save you a ton of time. Whether you have to find a problem, whether you're thinking about what's connected to what and having to make a determination on impact, it's all there. You can have an answer in seconds. Just think back to the times for those admins on the line or DevOps where you had to track down a potential impact for a change. How much time that took you? And what if you could know that in seconds? Massively, massively productive. And cleaning up and optimizing methodically. Knowing what the impact is going to be before you clean it up. Knowing what's in your system that's not been used in X amount of time so you can clean it out and perhaps even see performance enhancement. Massively valuable. Second, the concept of automated self-help. The ability to let certain users check and see for themselves if a change is risky. And then they can automatically monitor those changes. If you can get to that point where certain power users or certain users can try these things out themselves and see what the impact is, then that can free up significant DevOps times chasing down just these requests of, is this going to impact anything or can I do this? Well, now they'll know what the risk is. And then you can have an informed discussion about that and have eliminated a step that takes more resources. So again, it's about reducing bottlenecks, saving you time. And a third one that's perhaps a little more radical, but one we're having more and more discussions about, it's the concept of citizen developers. This is actually something that the founders of Salesforce envisioned back in the early day, where we could make these customizations and changes to our systems. But it's really hard, it gets harder and harder as the system gets more heavily customized and the implementation gets larger. But with Strongpoint, we can get you back to that place where people can actually try things out in their sandbox, see what the results are, refine the process themselves, and then take that to DevOps or the move into production, knowing that everything in the sandbox is protected with Strongpoint. You're running that same process in your sandbox as you are in production, and knowing that you have the tools and the capability for when you port into production and the oversight with Strongpoint that everything's going to be correct and necessary before it goes into production. But what this means is, let your power users and certain other users make their changes, see their results, and refine their process in your sandbox. And we can make that achievable. So start to think about what that could mean. And sure, you're not going to give the keys to the sandbox to everybody, but you might give it to a bunch of people that are currently making requests and demands of the DevOps team that now they can try it themselves and refine their process themselves. So it just makes good sense. And finally, whether it's to ensure best practices or for compliance purposes, constant monitoring and change process will absolutely ensure successful audits and a safe and secure platform. So with that, I'm going to want to turn over control to Sasha, and he will take you through the demo that should highlight the many things that I've mentioned. Obviously, if you have questions, please enter them into the system, and we'll get to them at the end, or we'll follow up with you afterwards if it's something that needs a little more description than what Sasha can do on the presentation. Okay, so with that, I'm turning over control to you, Sasha, and please take them through the platform.
Okay, great. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. The DevOps is an interesting subject, and it's one that's pretty near and dear to my heart, having done administration and development in my past. And it all starts with documentation. And at a high level, I want to know what's happening in my environment. I want to know all of the customizations I have, all of the objects, and more importantly, how they're tied to one another. And that's where Strongpoint documentation really comes into play. So when we first install Strongpoint and scan your environment, we create customization records for every single object, and more importantly, the joins between them. So that first step of DevOps is to come in and, if someone wants to make a change to something, being able to not only see that object, but what's tied to that object in all levels, whether it's workflows, reports, layouts, and just seeing how far down those tie-ins go. And this is sort of that first easy validation. If I make a change to this object, what's going to break downstream? We have customers who use this as a training device for their new system administrators, just because it's such an easy to use and valuable high-level view of all of the customizations in their environment. And again, if you're looking at an object that doesn't have anything tied to it, that might be an easy change to make. Or if you're looking at an object like this, which has multiple tie-ins, including workflows and scripts, this is definitely going to require a bit more work and a bit more oversight in order to make those changes work properly. So from documentation, the next part of that is looking at the customization itself. And I bring you here to show you a couple of things. And part of DevOps is making sure that your environment is clean and efficient. And this is that first step of ensuring that everything is as clean as possible. By using this improvement tab, you can flag individual customizations for cleanup, whether it needs to be archived or deleted, it needs to be reviewed further. You can flag them here, and this helps in your cleanup operation. So down the road, we have reports that are pre-built for you to access, and you'll be able to see exactly what needs to be cleaned out of the environment, so you know for a fact that it's not going to tie anything up anymore. And part of that is the date last used. And this feature is fairly powerful. When we install Strongpoint, we basically create information on when the last time this particular customization was used. So again, for cleanup purposes, you'll be able to see this hasn't been used for quite a while. You don't really think anyone's going to be using it. It's fairly safe to flag for cleanup. So moving on to the next step, and when we talk about citizen developers, we look at what we call a process issue. And a process issue is essentially the first step of interaction between those end users and your DevOps team. And this is where they essentially ask permission, or they're asking Strongpoint, if I make a change to something, what's going to happen? What's the level of control that's going to be applied to this? So just creating something here, and I'm going to select a report. And right away, I can see log changes only. And we'll get into change policies and change levels in a moment. but log changes only is our lowest level. So essentially we're saying, I trust you. This isn't a very impactful object. We're not really worried about what kind of impact this is going to have. So we're going to create a change log about this, and you go ahead, enjoy your day. On the other hand, if I change this to something like budgeted cost, that changes things entirely. The change level is full software development life cycle. So this is a standard field. It's very important. Its stability is very important to your environment. So we want to have a very stringent level of control around that. So this is step one. And this saves a lot of time for your DevOps team because right away they get an idea of how complex a change is going to be, and your citizen developers within your organization also have an idea of what's going to be involved in this change. If they want to make a change to a particular object and the change level that's applied to it is full software development cycle, this isn't going to be a quick change. This isn't going to be easy. This is going to require a lot of work and a lot of conversation with the DevOps team. So that is your first step. Change and approval policies are a core part of this, and this is where you apply different levels of control or of oversight to objects in your environment. When we first install Strongpoint, we create a default policy, and that default policy is sort of the overarching controls over everything unless you create other change policies, which we'll get to in a second. But as you can see here, the different types of objects have those different levels of control. So scripted objects, they're vital, they're very sensitive. If you break one, it's not a good thing. So you want to have full software development lifecycle, and that means in order for a scripted object to be compliant, a change to it, you have to start that change in sandbox, go through UAT, and then push into production and go through that entire process in order to make sure that that change is compliant and it's safe to make. The next level down is change requests, and this is essentially a change requires approval. So it needs to be reviewed before it's pushed into a different environment, and before DevOps gets their hands on it and goes into detail to see whether or not they can make that change. And as I mentioned, you can create as many change and approval policies as you want, and this really comes into play when you have different objects in your environment, even right down to the field level, that are more important than others. So, reports for the most part, not really impactful. Typically, log changes only is fine, but let's say you have a CEO dashboard of reports that the senior level leadership rely on a daily basis. Making changes to that should not be free and easy. So you would apply a different change policy specific to that folder or to those reports. And what this allows is for you to really put some good, solid control and oversight over all of the different objects in your environment to make sure that the things that need more control and more structure are being adhered to than others. So the change request, and this is the next step in that DevOps process, and this again really saves time for your developers and for people who are submitting these changes. So in that previous example with the process issue, they want to make a change to something that requires full software development lifecycle, for example. This is where they would come. They would create a change request, and this change request is essentially the home base for all of the details related to that proposed change. So they would come here and they would add all of the customizations that are in scope. So in this example, they want to make changes to these 4 customizations. Alternatively, if they're working on a change set within Salesforce, that can easily be imported. So if you have 3 or 30 different changes that are part of that change set, instead of selecting them one at a time in the change request, you can import them all in one shot, which again saves time. And you have all the details related to that. So who the approvers are in that process, what the change policy and change level required are, and the history of approvals for this. And more importantly, we come down to the impact analysis. And once the change request is created, Strongpoint automatically creates an impact analysis based on the customizations and scope. So a developer, instead of going through the system and doing searches and trying to find each individual customization and what it might be potentially tied to or impacted by, you have this impact analysis that automatically shows you what can be safely deleted or modified, and more importantly, what cannot be safely deleted or modified. So I'm going to open this up into a full screen, and as a developer, you receive this change request, and this is the difference between seeing nothing here in the cannot be safely deleted or modified and saying, okay, great, we can go ahead with this change, or looking at this and having absolute panic in your mind and saying, this is going to require a more of a discussion and a full project plan to put in place. So this is that next level of change validation, and it really gives your dev team a high-level view of everything that's going to be impacted if this change goes through. So I want to jump to change logs, and the reason I want to show this is, regardless of what change policy you have in place for your objects in your Salesforce environment, Strongpoint creates change logs for every change that occurs. And at a high level, they show things like whether or not they're compliant, the policy associated with them, and a change overview and things like that. But more importantly, they're going to show what exactly changed right down to the code level. And this is incredibly valuable for your development team, because if you have people going in and making changes to individual customizations, and perhaps they change something that they shouldn't have changed, and it breaks a whole bunch of things, and you wanted to see exactly what they did, this is going to save you hours of searching and trying to assess what happened. Here, you can go right in and look at exactly what changed, and you're able to reverse that change, or at the very least investigate further and see what the impact really is. So the next part of streamlining the DevOps process is an environmental comparison. And we're going through these examples of people within your sandbox environment making changes, proposing changes, and generally altering how Salesforce looks with those customizations. The environmental comparison is the next step in that. So when they've made a particular change and your DevOps team has reviewed it and it looks safe, this is the next step in that. And they can come here and they can compare whatever environments they want. So if they're going to push something from sandbox into production, here's where they would go to select those customizations, or if they have a specific change request, they can apply it here. And this gets right down into the nitty-gritty so that you're seeing just what's involved in that change request and what it looks like in those two environments. And this is a very powerful review. So you can see whether or not it exists in the source or the target environment. So in these two cases, it doesn't exist in the source. It's only in the target, so it's only in production. However, we start getting down here, and these exist in both, but there are differences between the source and the target, and you can see those differences. So, I was just speaking with a customer earlier, and they have a discount value field, and it's a numeric field, but they have to key those in manually from one environment to the other. And the environmental comparison tool helps them to compare the two environments and see if it's matching in production and showing what it should show. And just because of that manual process, there are going to be miskeys. They're going to type things incorrectly. There are going to be issues with that. And this gives them a really easy way to find those differences and make sure they're addressing them immediately. So in other cases, you have an object and you're trying to get some more information related to it. You want to see all of the fields that are involved in it, all the profiles that have access to it, and their permissions. And this is where the export object tool comes into play. So here, for example, I need to make some changes to account. I want to review all of the fields that are available for it, who has access to those fields from a standard user perspective. and I just download that object. And now I'm in the account. And again, this is a very powerful tool for your developers and for your system administrators, because you can see all of the fields, standard and custom, related to the particular object you've selected. And more importantly, any of the object permissions and the profile permissions. So if you have particular profiles and you want to make sure that they have the right permissions, or to see if they have permissions they shouldn't have, you would be able to see this all in one place. And that's going to include any of the API information, record types that are associated with it, and so on. Okay. So from a DevOps perspective, you can see how from beginning to end, Strongpoint is going to help you to save time. It's going to help you save time when it comes to the initial documentation. So looking at everything in your environment and what's tied to what. It helps you with those initial process issues. So when your end users want to make a change, they're able to submit a request to you, and it's sort of a mini approval. Like if I want to make this change, I want to see what level of change control is applied to it. You are able to put those change policies into place so that you can control certain objects and relinquish a bit of control on others to streamline that development process, so you're not getting inundated with approvals for every single thing in your environment. If things do change, you have all of that information accessible in one place, so you can see right down to the script level what has been changed. And then you get into the environmental comparison. So when you're ready to push a change from your sandbox into production, you're able to do a quick validation to make sure that everything is going to go smoothly. The final thing I wanted to show you related to DevOps is the next step in that process. And once a change has been approved and you are ready to do that deployment, you can do that simply and quickly from the actual change request itself. And once you push that change, you're going to create a deployment ticket. And that deployment ticket for your dev team is the final sniff test, so to speak. This is the final place where you can review this deployment and make sure that everything is going to go smoothly with it. Once you've approved it, everything looks great, you can push into the environment, and it's going to create a deployment log. And I really want to focus on this deployment log for a minute, because as someone who has struggled with change sets and trying to find out what failed in a change set that had numerous changes in it, these deployment logs are wonderful. It not only shows you the high-level information, so whether or not a change, a deployment failed or passed, but it's also going to show you all the customizations that were in scope for it, and more importantly, all of the components that were successfully deployed and the components that failed. And with those components that failed, not only are you going to be able to see which components those were, but why they failed, again, right down to the code level. So instead of spending hours trying to assess what went wrong with your change set, what happened, what your production environment didn't like about it, you have all of that information in one place, and you can go into those details immediately and see what the deployment messages were for them. So this saves dev teams hours of time in terms of their deployments and making sure that things went smoothly. So that, in a nutshell, is DevOps with Strongpoint. At this point, I believe we're going to pass it on for questions.
Hey everybody, this is Derek. So thank you very much, Sasha, for that. One of the questions that came in was, let's open it up here again. How does Strongpoint affect concurrent requests and general load on Salesforce? So first of all, to be clear, so the answer is we don't actually affect it greatly once we're up and running. So we only look at once we've originally done our initial scanning and logging of everything, we only look at the deltas of things. So there's not a heavy system demand when we're running our process. So we don't really have any slowdown in Salesforce or affect any slowdown in Salesforce, regardless of the number of customizations you have. Where that is important is the time it takes to do our initial scanning and logging of everything. And we have certain ways to work through that with our clients, and we can talk to you about that. So if you have a heavily customized system, instead of the scanning and logging process taking 2 or 3 days, we might string it out over a longer period of time to make sure that we don't impact you, maybe do it over different periods of time, things like that. So, but once it's up and running and that initial process is done, because you can imagine that's a very large process to grab all that information and store it and log it. But once that's done, no, we don't impact regardless of how large your implementation or customization.
What I'd like to jump in there really quickly. What we've seen with some previous installations, more recent installations, some customers, if they have a very customized environment, they have a high level of Apex jobs that are being run on a daily basis, and Strongpoint has been configured to be smart about those. So during the initial installation, we look at your Apex jobs and we see the traffic related to it, and Strongpoint basically will throttle itself. So if you have a high level of Apex jobs, Strongpoint is going to limit itself to the number of Apex scan jobs it does in a particular day to make sure that you're never near that daily threshold that Salesforce puts on customers. So, Strongpoint is smart enough to always prioritize you and your environment over itself.
Terrific. Thanks, Sasha. Okay, the next question. Also, my Salesforce organization has a very large number of custom objects and managed objects, managed packages. Does Strongpoint monitor changes to managed packages? And yes, the answer is yes, we do. And even if some of that data is obfuscated, we can see that there's a change that could impact you, and we have all of those. We understand what those impacts are. It does follow a different change approval process or a change process, because certainly you can't know what those changes are going to be in advance. So it does have to follow a different process. But the short answer is yes, we do monitor those changes to the managed packages. And Sasha, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, that's an excellent summarization.
Okay, great. One more question came in. Does Strongpoint monitor system-level objects in changes like logins from restricted countries? So that is a question I actually don't have an answer to. Sasha, do you know, we monitor system-level objects. So changes for like logins from restricted countries, that sounds like absolutely something we would manage.
You are correct in that, yes.
Okay. Okay. So the answer is yes. So I think what I'd like you to leave you with is please think about, obviously, the automated documentation piece, immediate benefit. You could be up and running from the time you say yes. Within a week, you would have your system automatically documented and everything constantly being tracked and know what's connected to what. It's massively valuable and immediately valuable to you right away. And then everything else that we've shown you, again, doesn't take a lot of time to get you up and running and trained very quickly, and you'll have a much faster, more productive team and a much safer and more secure environment. Okay, so I would encourage anybody that's listening, if you want more information, please visit our website at strongpoint.io, and you will be able to see both previous webinars that we've done as well as information on our platform. But more importantly, I'd love you to click the requested demo. We'll get back in touch with you, and we'll speak to you a little bit about what your requirements might be, and we can do a customized demo specifically for you on what your needs might be, and get you to have a good look at the system and how it could value, or how it could be of tremendous value for you. There really isn't anybody that does things the way we do it and to the extent we do it. Obviously, if it hasn't been made clear, we operate within your Salesforce instance. So there is no data leaving your system, coming to us and going back. It's all done within Salesforce and within your instance. So very safe, very secure, and will save you a ton of time and eliminate a ton of stress. So with that, I want to thank you for attending this webinar, and I encourage you please to contact us at our website and let us give a chance to show you what we can do. All right? Thanks a lot, Sasha. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.